But just to make it clear, euthanasia is about a direct and intentional cause of death. So people confuse it sometimes with ending medical treatment and things like that. Euthanasia is not got anything to do with medical treatment itself, but it is about intentionally causing death. So it would be usually done by lethal injection. It can be done by many ways, obviously. It's a form of homicide. See, it's not about withholding or withdrawing medical treatment, right? Especially when it's futile, burdensome, extraordinary. But medical treatment, if you withdraw medical treatment, what happens if the person dies? They don't always die, right? But if the person dies, they would die of their medical condition. But they don't always die. But if you give me a lethal injection, I'm dead, right? If you withdraw medical treatment, I may or may not die. But if I die, I would die of my medical condition. It's not about the proper use of large doses of pain-killing drugs. Now obviously that could be abused, right? You could actually abuse the proper use of large doses of pain-killing drugs and kill somebody that way. That's correct. But when someone's actually in pain and needing a lot of drug, there's no intention to kill, well, then obviously it would not be euthanasia. And it's not about the proper use of sedation. A lot of discussion today around this question of sedation, because if someone's in intractable pain, you might have had a friend or someone you knew who had a lot of pain, and near the end they put them into a sleep for a period of time. That's sedating them. There's moral questions around that issue, but the fact is to sedate someone is not the same as euthanasia. It could be abused again, and that's what does go on in some places. Assisted suicide is a little different. It's assisting a suicide, meaning someone is wanting to kill themselves and I become directly and intentionally involved. So I assist them by either providing them the means, or counseling them, or encouraging them, but I'm directly involved with that suicide death. The law makes a lot of sense. The law is there to protect me from another person when I'm at the lowest point in my life. When I'm going through difficulty, the law is designed to protect me. So if the other side wins and they strike down this assisted suicide law, what does it mean? It means when I'm at the lowest time in my life, when I'm going through depression, when I am in such moral angst that I think my life is not worth living, now somebody else will have the right to cause my death. In Canada we have this Jocelyn Downey, but in the world there's this guy named Peter Singer. I don't know if you've heard of him, a philosopher. He's convinced in the world that there's no difference between killing and letting die. And this is a big point of the issue actually, because you get these people in white coats who are educated, and they call themselves bioethicists, and they say, well, there's no difference between killing and letting die, so we should just legalize euthanasia because we do it every day already anyway. And that's what they're arguing. Well, we do it all the time. We withdraw medical treatment, or we might give someone a large dose of pain-killing drugs and then they accidentally died. We do it all the time anyway. But there's a huge difference between killing and letting die, and the biggest difference, of course, is the intention. The intention is not to kill somebody when you let someone die. You allow them to die naturally. And I keep reminding people, wait a second here. You know, if you withdraw treatment, what's the intention? The intention is to allow natural death to occur. I don't know anybody who's opposed to death. I think we're opposed to killing people. None of us is opposed to death. We're all going to die. So I'm going to go through some stories with you. The first one is Mark and Eddie Verbusson. You might have seen that story. I don't know. If you're in my work, you would have. Obviously, I wrote a lot about it. These were two men who were born deaf, identical twins. They lived all their life together, and now they had macular degeneration. They were going blind. So here's the point. They're not blind yet, but they are going blind. They're not physically ill in any way. They decided that going blind was too great an amount of psychological suffering. Psychological suffering. So therefore going blind became a reason why they asked for euthanasia, and they died by euthanasia. In October last year, they had a Dutch news story with the very first woman who was perfectly healthy, but she was becoming blind. So she's not deaf, she's becoming blind. She's not blind yet. She was obsessed with cleanliness, and she said that becoming blind was too great a level of psychological suffering. Psychological suffering. So she died by euthanasia because she qualified under psychological suffering. There's just an article in the Kingston Whig Standard just a couple days ago. You know, there's no fear of a slippery slope. These people opposed to euthanasia. There's no such worry of a slippery. Whenever it's been legalized, it has not happened. And it's like, well, in 2002, when they legalized euthanasia in the Netherlands, were they thinking of a healthy woman who's not blind yet? She's going blind, and she's going to die by euthanasia? Remember, we're talking about lethal injection. We're not talking about, no, we're talking about lethally injecting her because she has fear of not being clean. What about Anne? This is a crazy case. When they legalized euthanasia in Belgium, I guarantee you, those guys who argue that there's no slippery slope, they were not thinking of Anne in 2002 when they legalized euthanasia. She had anorexia nervosa. This was her psychiatrist, Dr. Van der Eycken, who is, specializes in the treatment of anorexia. Anne accused her psychiatrist of sexually exploiting her. She also claimed he had sexually exploited several other patients. The whole process of this complaint did not go well for Anne. And she decided that the psychological suffering that she was experiencing, not from her anorexia, but from her experience with her psychiatrist, was so great that she could not live any longer. She died by euthanasia. So let's think this through. Here you have a victim who believes, I wasn't with them, so I can't say for sure. I'm assuming that she's not lying. She's saying she was sexually exploited by her psychiatrist. And because of her complaint process not going well, she then says she needs to die. She needed help. She needed support. She needed someone to care about her. Instead, she's dead by euthanasia. She's not physically ill. Now, anorexia, as you know, is a terrible condition, but that wasn't the reason she asked for it. It was because of her psychological suffering. Anne died by euthanasia. Van der Eycken is seeing patients. What about Tom Mortier's mom? Now, we know an awful lot about this because Tom had no idea his mom was going to die by euthanasia. He had no idea. He got a call on April the 20th of 2012, basically from the hospital saying, well, I'll arrange for your mom's funeral and everything. So he's shocked, right? She was depressed. Now, she did have long-term depression, but what happened is, okay, the picture I should tell you a little about. He sent me this picture of her because he wanted me to show you how happy a person she was. She was a retired teacher. She had some money. She enjoyed traveling. And she was doing a lot of traveling. Now, her husband had committed suicide many years earlier, and she was in a long-term relationship. It's when that relationship broke up that she decided she didn't want to live anymore. That isn't much different than a lot of other people, what they go through when they have a relationship breakup. The difference is she wanted euthanasia, and euthanasia is legal in Belgium. Her psychiatrist said no. Her psychiatrist said she was treatable. Her psychiatrist said no. She went to where? The euthanasia clinic. So in Belgium, it would be the same thing here. Because not all doctors want to do euthanasia. In fact, very few actually want to do it. So therefore, they have a euthanasia clinic. Same thing in the Netherlands. They have a euthanasia clinic. So she went there, and the doctors then sent her to a psychiatrist who said yes. And she died by euthanasia. So it didn't matter that her psychiatrist, and in fact, Tom found out another psychiatrist she went to also said no. It didn't matter that doctors examined her. A doctor who she had been seeing as a psychiatrist for quite a few years said no, it didn't matter about that. What mattered is one said yes, and she died by euthanasia. This is an abandonment. You have someone who needs help, not death. And this is where it goes. Well, let's look at Oregon. In Oregon, they say, well, if you don't like what's going on in Belgium, you can have assisted suicide and we can control it. And in Oregon, they've got nirvana. They've got a controlled system and they still have assisted suicide. It's beautiful. But they have something in their safeguards, because they all tell us about safeguards. There's safeguards in a lot. They have one of their safeguards that if you are depressed, you can't have assisted suicide. Well, that would seem like a good idea. So Dr. Bentz's patient, well, Dr. Bentz had a long-term patient who he had diagnosed with cancer. So this is somebody who had been with him for quite a few years as a patient. He diagnosed his patient with cancer. He sent his patient to a cancer specialist. Dr. Benson explained the story. He published the story specifically to show you the law doesn't protect you. Because he said, well, look, I noted in his medical record, my patient is depressed. So in Oregon, it takes 2 doctors to agree. So the cancer specialist calls up Dr. Benson and says, can you be the second doctor to agree to your patient dying by assisted suicide? And Ben says, no, my patient doesn't qualify, my patient's depressed. His patient died 15 days later by assisted suicide. So even though the primary physician has diagnosed him as depressed, and the law says you can't do it to someone who's depressed, the patient dies anyway by assisted suicide. There's no protection. What the law is designed to protect the doctor, not the patient. And the 15 days actually is also significant because in Oregon they have another safeguard. It's a 14-day waiting period. So you know that this doctor did not send that patient for a psychiatric assessment. It's not possible. They just got another doctor to agree. They just made another phone call and another doctor just agreed. That's all that happened. Harper Wagner was dependent on the state health care plan in Oregon. She did not have private health insurance. She had an aggressive form of cancer. Actually, she had lung cancer. She went into remission and then it recurred. It was very aggressive. She was given an aggressive form of cancer treatment. That's what she was prescribed, but the state health plan said, no, you're not going to have that treatment. It's too expensive. But we will give you assisted suicide. So the point of it is, the other side says, oh, it's all about free choice. Well, when the state health plan is involved with offering you assisted suicide, is that really a free choice now? Now, I'm not saying here that she had to receive the medical treatment. Like, I can understand a government, you know, saying we can only afford so much medical treatment and we won't, that's too expensive. Like even in Ontario, there's lots of things that are not listed. So it's not the issue. The issue is, what is the state doing offering her assisted suicide? She said to say to someone, we'll pay for you to die but not pay for you to live, is cruel. So, you know, it all comes together. What about this one? This story really brings it together. Jeanette Hall. This is a letter that Jeanette Hall wrote. She actually sent this letter to Montana because Montana was debating assisted suicide at the time. And in 2000, so she lives in Oregon, and in Oregon they had passed assisted suicide by a plebiscite, a voter initiative. And she voted in favor of assisted suicide. She was diagnosed with cancer. She was given 6 months to a year to live. She qualified for assisted suicide. And she was quite clear. She wanted assisted suicide. That's what she wanted. She wanted to die. She didn't want radiation. She didn't want to suffer. She just wanted to die. But she didn't know how to do it. So she was asking her doctor about it, but her doctor didn't believe in assisted suicide. So what did her doctor do? Her doctor convinced her to try some treatment. And she went into remission. She's alive today. What's the importance of the story? Let's go back to what I said to you before. It's not about someone asking for it. It's not about some free choice. It's about somebody else agreeing that, yes, I agree your life's not worth living, and I'm going to go ahead and do it to you. It's about somebody else also agreeing you should be dead. And she says, it's now 12 years later. If my doctor had believed in assisted suicide, I would be dead. She qualified. She would have been dead. I thank him and all my doctors for helping me choose life with dignity. She says, I'm happy to be alive.